Joining us right now is Dewardrick McNeil, Longview Global Managing Director and a CNBC contributor. And Dewardrick, I realize that Ukraine may not be the primary reason that she went to Putin, but it is certainly one that we're watching pretty closely. What are the potential implications when it comes to the war in Ukraine?
Thanks for having me, Becky. Look, you're right that this was not the primary focus of Xi's visit, but to your point, China's made a good public showing of wanting to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. It floated, as we all know, its 12-point plan. The reality, though, Becky, is this is not a near-term reality for China to broker a peace in Ukraine. China's aware of this. But this message is largely for the Chinese domestic audience, as well as the global South, who are also pretty lukewarm on the Ukraine war, seeing it as a distraction from some of the issues that they hold dear, like climate change and global growth and recovery of emerging markets. So they would like to see this come to an end. They would love for China's 12-point plan to be real, but this is, again, not a near-term reality.
We hear behind the scenes that Putin's regime and the economy in Russia is in much more dire straits than maybe some of the numbers they put forth would actually suggest, that things are quite a bit tougher there. What does this visit from Xi mean to Russia's economy potentially?
Oh, this is an extremely big deal. It's an important reason. It is the focus, really, of this trip. Becky, you know, Chinese trade with Russia was about $190 billion last year. That's up 30% over where it was in 2021. But both sides have benefited from this increased economic relationship. The Russians, of course, it's been a lifeline for them to help weather the sanctions. But for China, China has been receiving some pretty secure and cheap energy resources from Russia. So this trip is about doing more of that. But the real question is what's going to happen after the visit. And what the U.S. is looking for is whether or not this visit yields some sort of systemic and consequential economic lifeline for Russia to evade sanctions. And they're also, Becky, of course, looking for whether or not there'll be some sort of lethal military aid. So there's a lot being said, but here in Washington, we'll be watching for what will happen after this visit.
So if the peace plan is really just smoke and mirrors at this point, not something that's going to stabilize, and the visit from the economic basis is one that could potentially prolong Russia's attacks against Ukraine, how does that end up reflecting on our relationship with China, our reflection in other Western nations?
Well, I think the relationship was already bad. This is certainly not going to improve it. But again, the trip on its own won't really damage relations. It's going to be what happens after this visit. But to your point, Europe, of course, is very concerned because they obviously do not want to see a prolonged war in Ukraine. Europe has often looked to China as a way to try and bring this war to an end. And so there's probably more hope in Europe than there is in Washington. But again, I don't believe that this 12-point plan is something that is serious at the moment. It's dead on arrival until the Russians withdraw from Ukraine.